In the quiet hours, when the world sleeps and your mind seeks solace, there exists a story that has whispered through centuries, a tale so powerful it has survived wars, revolutions, and the relentless march of time itself. Tonight, we journey to Verona, a city where stone walls hold secrets, and where love bloomed so fiercely it defied death itself. This is not just any love story. This is the love story that taught the world what it means to love beyond reason, beyond family, beyond fear. Before you settle into the embrace of sleep, let me paint for you a world where passion burned brighter than the Italian sun, where two young hearts dared to love in a city poisoned by hatred. You've heard whispers of Romeo and Juliet, fragments of their tragedy scattered through popular culture and half-remembered school lessons. But tonight, in the gentle darkness of your room, you'll experience their story as it was meant to be felt. Raw, beautiful, and heartbreakingly real. This tale I'm about to share with you isn't just about star-crossed lovers. It's about the moment when love becomes larger than life itself, when two souls recognize each other across a crowded room, and suddenly the entire universe shifts. It's about the courage it takes to choose love over safety, passion over prudence, and how sometimes the greatest love stories are written not in happiness, but in sacrifice. So close your eyes, let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to be transported to a time when love letters were written by candlelight, when a single glance could change the course of destiny, and when the balcony of a noble house became the stage for the most famous declaration of love the world has ever known. In fair Verona, where our story unfolds, the morning sun casts long shadows across ancient cobblestone streets. The year was somewhere in the mists of the Renaissance, when Italy bloomed with art, poetry, and passion, but also festered with feuds that had grown like poisonous vines through generations. The city breathed with life, merchants calling their wares, children playing in narrow alleyways, and bells chiming from countless church towers. Yet, beneath this vibrant surface, ran currents of hatred so deep they had stained the very stones with blood. Two houses, both alike in dignity and wealth, had turned the beautiful city into a battlefield of pride. The Montagues and the Capulets, names that once might have stood for honor, had become synonymous with violence and vengeance. Their feud was ancient, so old that none could remember its beginning, only its bitter continuance. Sons grew up learning to hate before they learned to love, and daughters were taught that the enemy wore a specific name, like a brand upon their souls. But love, as we shall see, has a way of laughing at human hatred, of blooming in the most impossible soil. Romeo Montague walked through Verona's streets that morning with the particular melancholy that only young men seem to possess. At 17, he carried himself with the grace of nobility, but the restlessness of youth. His dark eyes held depths that spoke of a soul too sensitive for the harsh world around him, too romantic for the practical concerns of family feuds and arranged marriages. He was the kind of young man who saw poetry in morning light, who could find metaphors in the flight of birds, and who believed, despite all evidence to the contrary, that love could conquer anything. His friends often mocked his romantic nature. While they spoke of conquest and commerce, Romeo dreamed of a love that would transform him, complete him, make him whole. He had convinced himself he was in love with Rosalind, a distant cousin of the Capulets, who had sworn herself to chastity and would not return his affections. This unrequited love had become his constant companion, a sweet torture that he wore like a badge of romantic honor. Meanwhile, in the grand Capulet palace, Juliet was experiencing the last morning of her childhood. Though she did not know it yet, at 13, she possessed a beauty that was just beginning to reveal itself, like a flower on the verge of blooming. But it was not merely her physical beauty that would soon captivate hearts. It was the light that seemed to shine from within her, an innocence coupled with an intelligence that made her seem older than her years. The Capulet household buzzed with preparation that morning. Old Capulet, Juliet's father, had decided it was time for his daughter to consider marriage. Count Paris, a nobleman of impeccable breeding and substantial wealth, had asked for her hand. The match was advantageous in every practical way, a union that would strengthen alliances and secure fortunes. What more could any father want for his daughter? Juliet's mother, Lady Capulet, approached her daughter's chambers with a mixture of excitement and nervous energy. Marriage at 13 was not uncommon in their world, and she herself had become a mother at an age not much older. Yet something in her daughter's bright eyes gave her pause, a spark of independence that reminded her uncomfortably of her own lost youth. The nurse, Juliet's devoted caretaker since birth, bustled about the room with characteristic warmth and chatter. She had raised Juliet with more tenderness than many mothers showed their own children, and her love for the girl ran deeper than duty. In her earthy wisdom, she understood that matters of the heart could not be arranged like flowers in a vase, no matter how beautiful the intended result. As the morning sun climbed higher, fate began weaving the threads that would bind two young hearts together. Benvolio, Romeo's cousin and closest friend, found him wandering through a grove of olive trees outside the city walls, composing melancholy verses about his unrequited love for Rosalind. "Cousin, you torture yourself needlessly," Benvolio said, with the practical concern of a true friend. "There are other beauties in Verona, other hearts that might welcome your affection. Why waste your youth pining for one who has sworn herself beyond love's reach?" Romeo sighed with the dramatic flair that his friends had learned to expect. "You speak as if love were a market transaction, as if one heart could simply replace another. When you truly love, Benvolio, you will understand that there is only one face in all the world that can bring light to your darkness." But Benvolio had a plan, born of the kind of mischief that only the young can devise with pure intentions. That very evening, the Capulets were hosting their annual feast, a grand celebration that would draw the nobility of Verona to their halls. Rosalind would certainly attend, and perhaps seeing her surrounded by other beautiful women would help Romeo realize that his heart need not remain prisoner to one unattainable lady. "Come with me tonight," Benvolio urged. "We'll mask our faces and join the celebration. You can see your Rosalind and perhaps compare her beauty to others. I wager that in a room full of Verona's loveliest women, your eyes might find new inspiration." Romeo initially protested, knowing full well that Montagues were decidedly unwelcome at Capulet festivities, but something in his romantic heart was stirred by the danger of it, the poetry of loving one's enemy, even from afar. Love, he reasoned, should be brave enough to risk everything. As evening approached, the Capulet palace transformed into a wonderland of light and music. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on tapestried walls. Musicians tuned their instruments in the great hall, their melodies drifting through corridors like promises of magic to come. Servants hurried through the kitchens, preparing delicacies that would tempt the most sophisticated palates. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation. Juliet stood before her mirror as her mother and the nurse helped her prepare for the evening. Her gown was a masterpiece of silk and silver thread, designed to announce her availability for marriage without appearing too eager. Her dark hair was arranged in the fashion of the day, with small pearls woven through the braids like captured starlight. Yet, for all their efforts to present her as a woman ready for marriage, she remained achingly young, her eyes bright with curiosity rather than calculation. "Tonight, you will meet Count Paris," her mother explained with careful enthusiasm. "He is everything a young woman could hope for in a husband: wealthy, handsome, well-connected, and most importantly, eager to make you his wife. Your father has given his blessing to the match, should you find the young man agreeable." Juliet listened with the polite attention she had been taught, but her heart felt strangely unmoved by the prospect. She had always imagined that when love came, it would arrive like lightning, sudden and unmistakable. The thought of choosing a husband based on practical considerations seemed as foreign to her romantic nature as choosing a sunset based on its utility. The nurse, watching Juliet's face in the mirror, recognized the look of a young woman whose heart had not yet been awakened. "My lady, there's no harm in meeting the gentleman. Love sometimes grows from acquaintance, like a seed that needs time to take root. But remember, sweet child, that your heart knows things your mind has not yet learned." As the first guests began arriving at the Capulet Palace, Romeo, Benvolio, and their friend Mercutio made their way through Verona's darkening streets. They wore masks in the Venetian style, elaborate creations of leather and feathers that would conceal their identities while allowing them to move freely through the celebration. Mercutio, ever the jester and philosopher, regaled them with witty observations about love and folly as they walked. "You speak of love as if it were some noble quest," Mercutio laughed, his mask bobbing with his animated gestures. "But I say, love is nothing more than a madness that makes fools of wise men and poets of merchants. Romeo, my friend, you would do better to forget this Rosalind and simply enjoy the evening's pleasures without such weighty expectations." But Romeo's heart was already racing with anticipation. Something in the night air whispered of change, of destiny, waiting just beyond the next corner. He could not have known that across the city, Juliet was experiencing the same strange sense of approaching transformation, as if the very stars were shifting to align their fates. The great doors of the Capulet Palace stood open, welcoming guests into a world of warmth and splendor. Inside, the celebration had begun in earnest. Couples danced to the lilting melodies of lute and violin, their movements graceful and precise as the steps of an elaborate ritual. Wine flowed from silver pitchers, and the air filled with laughter, conversation, and the rustle of silk gowns against marble floors. And somewhere in that glittering crowd, two young hearts prepared to meet for the first time, unaware that their lives were about to change forever, unaware that they were about to write one of history's most beautiful and tragic love stories with their very souls. Count Paris moved through the grand hall with the confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. Tall and fair-haired, he possessed the kind of classical beauty that artists carved into marble statues. His conversation was polished, his manners impeccable, and his prospects enviable by any measure society might use. Yet there was something curiously hollow about his perfection, as if he were a beautifully crafted vessel, waiting for something to fill it with meaning. He had requested this meeting with Juliet not out of passionate love, but from a practical understanding that marriage was both duty and advantage. She was beautiful, well-born, and young enough to be molded into the perfect wife he envisioned. In his mind, love was something that would grow naturally, from respect and compatibility, like a garden carefully tended, according to established principles. Old Capulet watched with satisfaction as Paris made his way toward where Juliet stood with her mother. The match would cement important political alliances and ensure his daughter's future in ways that romantic notions simply could not. He had lived long enough to see passion fade and practical considerations endure. What father would not choose security over the uncertain flames of young love? But as Paris approached, something extraordinary was happening at the entrance to the great hall. 3 masked figures had slipped past the doormen, their noble bearing and rich clothes allowing them to blend seamlessly with the other guests. Romeo's heart hammered against his ribs as he stepped into the Capulet stronghold, enemy territory that felt both dangerous and thrilling. The hall stretched before them like a vision from a dream. Golden light danced off polished surfaces, creating an atmosphere so magical it seemed removed from the harsh realities of feuds and bloodshed. Musicians played from a gallery overlooking the main floor, their melodies weaving through conversations and laughter, like invisible threads connecting every soul in the room. Benvolio nudged Romeo's arm and pointed toward a cluster of young women near the far wall. "There, cousin, do you see Rosalind among them? The one in blue silk with the pearls in her hair?" Romeo followed his gaze and found the object of his supposed affection. Rosalind stood in profile, her beauty undeniable but somehow distant, like a painting of a beautiful woman rather than beauty itself. He had spent months composing verses about her dark eyes and graceful neck, yet now, seeing her in person, he felt strangely disconnected from his own passionate declarations. It was at that moment, as his eyes swept the room in mild disappointment, that Romeo saw her. Time itself seemed to pause, as if the universe had drawn a breath and forgotten to exhale. Across the crowded hall, a young woman moved with unconscious grace, her silver gown catching the torchlight like captured moonbeams. She was speaking with an older gentleman, her face animated with polite attention, but Romeo could see only the music of her movements, the way light seemed to gather around her as if she were its source. Juliet, for her part, was doing her best to appear interested in Count Paris's description of his estates and his plans for their improvement. He spoke of crop rotations and tenant farmers with the same enthusiasm other young men might reserve for poetry or adventure. She nodded at appropriate intervals and smiled when expected, but her mind wandered to the stories the nurse had told her of her own parents' courtship, filled with stolen glances and secret letters that made the heart race with anticipation. "My lady," Paris was saying, "I believe a wife should take genuine interest in the management of her husband's affairs. Too many marriages suffer when the woman concerns herself only with frivolous pursuits. I hope I may count on your more serious nature." Before Juliet could respond with the appropriate agreement, her attention was caught by a disturbance in her peripheral vision. A young man across the room had stopped moving entirely, standing frozen among the swirling dancers, like a statue suddenly granted life, but not yet understanding how to use it. Even with his mask concealing half his face, she could see his eyes, dark and intense, fixed upon her with an expression she had never encountered before. Their gazes met across the crowded hall, and in that instant, the world changed. The musicians continued playing, the dancers kept dancing, and conversations flowed around them like water around stones. But Romeo and Juliet existed suddenly in a bubble of perfect silence, perfect recognition, perfect, impossible love. Romeo felt his carefully constructed devotion to Rosaline crumble like a tower built on sand. How could he have thought he understood love when he had never felt his heart stop and restart with new purpose? How could he have believed poetry could capture beauty when he had never seen the living embodiment of every sonnet ever written? This was not the gentle melancholy of unrequited affection. This was a force of nature, as undeniable as gravity, as essential as breathing. Juliet experienced her own revelation with equal intensity. The careful lessons about suitable marriages and practical considerations dissolved like morning mist before the sun. Count Paris might possess every virtue her parents valued, but this stranger across the room possessed something infinitely more precious. He held her heart in his eyes, and she had given it willingly before she even understood what was happening. Neither could have said how long they stood there, drinking in each other's presence, like travelers dying of thirst, who had suddenly found an oasis. It might have been seconds or centuries. Time had ceased to have meaning in the face of recognition so complete it felt like remembering, rather than meeting for the first time. Romeo found himself moving without conscious decision, drawn across the dance floor as if by invisible strings. Couples parted before him like water, though he was unaware of their existence. The only reality was the young woman in silver, who watched his approach with eyes that seemed to hold starlight and promise in equal measure. Benvolio, watching his cousin abandon all pretense of subtlety, felt the first stirrings of concern. This was not the Romeo who had pined decorously for Rosalind from a safe distance. This was a young man walking toward his destiny with the single-minded purpose of a sleepwalker, oblivious to danger, propriety, or consequence. Count Paris, still explaining his views on domestic economy, gradually became aware that his intended bride was no longer listening. Following her gaze, he saw the masked stranger approaching with unmistakable intent. Something cold settled in his stomach, a recognition that his carefully laid plans might be about to encounter an unexpected obstacle. Lady Capulet noticed her daughter's distraction and turned to see what had captured her attention so completely. The sight of the unknown young man moving through the crowd with such focused determination sent a flutter of unease through her maternal instincts. She had seen that look before, in her own youth, and remembered both its beauty and its danger. But Juliet was aware of none of these concerned observers. Her world had narrowed to the space between herself and the approaching stranger, to the promise in his eyes and the answering call in her own heart. She felt as if she had been sleepwalking through life until this moment, going through the motions of existence without truly living. And now she was finally, completely awake. Romeo reached her at last, stopping just close enough that they could speak without being overheard, but not so close as to breach the bounds of propriety entirely. Yet even that small distance felt like an ocean, and both found themselves fighting the urge to step closer, to touch, to confirm that this miraculous connection was real and not merely the product of wishful imagination. "My lady," Romeo said, his voice soft but carrying clearly in the space between them, If I profane with my unworthiest hand this holy shrine, the gentle sin is this: my lips, two blushing pilgrims, ready stand to smooth that rough touch with a tender kiss. The words came from somewhere deeper than conscious thought. Poetry, born from the collision of overwhelming feeling with inadequate language. He extended his hand toward hers, not quite touching, waiting for permission to bridge the final gap between them. Juliet felt her breath catch at the beauty of his words, at the reverence in his voice that made her feel like something precious beyond measure. Without conscious thought, she found herself responding in kind, her own poetic nature awakening to match his. Good pilgrim, you do wrong your hand too much, which mannerly devotion shows in this. For saints have hands that pilgrims' hands do touch, and palm to palm is holy palmer's kiss. Their hands met, palm to palm, and both felt the shock of connection run through them like lightning. The simple touch contained more intimacy than kisses they had never shared, more promise than vows they had never spoken. In the joining of their hands, they felt the joining of their souls, complete and irreversible. Around them, the celebration continued in blissful ignorance of the miracle taking place in their midst. Musicians played, wine flowed, and conversations buzzed with the comfortable rhythm of social ritual. Yet Romeo and Juliet stood at the center of their own private universe, one created by the simple act of two hearts recognizing their other half across a crowded room. Have not saints lips and holy palmers too? Romeo asked, his voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of a prayer. His eyes never left hers, and in their depths, she saw a question that had nothing to do with theology and everything to do with the desperate need to close the space between them. Juliet felt her pulse quicken at the implications of his words. She understood the game they were playing, this sacred metaphor that allowed them to speak of desire while cloaked in religious imagery. I, pilgrim, lips that they must use in prayer, she replied, her voice steady despite the trembling she felt throughout her entire being. Oh then, dear saint, let lips do what hands do, Romeo continued, his thumb tracing the lightest caress across her knuckles. They pray, grant thou, lest faith turn to despair. The breath left her lungs entirely. Here was a young man who spoke her language, who understood that love could be both sacred and profane, who could weave poetry from the simplest touch. Saints do not move, though grant for prayer's sake, she managed, the words coming from some deep well of wisdom she hadn't known she possessed. Then move not, while my prayer's effect I take, Romeo whispered, and leaned forward to press his lips gently against hers. The kiss was soft, reverent, lasting only a heartbeat, yet it contained within it the promise of eternity. Both felt the world shift around them, as if the very foundations of reality had been rebuilt in that single moment of connection. When they parted, neither could speak, both struggling to comprehend the magnitude of what had just passed between them. The spell was broken by the approach of the nurse, who had been watching the exchange with growing alarm. She had seen enough of life to recognize the signs of instant, irrevocable love, and she knew such lightning strikes rarely brought anything but trouble to those they illuminated. Madam, your mother craves a word with you, the nurse announced, her tone carefully neutral, but her eyes urgent with warning. Juliet startled as if waking from a dream, suddenly remembering where she was, who she was, and all the expectations that surrounded her like invisible chains. She turned to Romeo with eyes that held both apology and promise. "I come anon. But first, good sir, who is that gentleman that would not dance?" She gestured toward a figure near the wall, but her question was merely a pretense. What she truly wanted to know was his name, his family, his very identity, so she might have something concrete to attach to this overwhelming feeling that had seized her heart. Romeo, understanding the game, played along. "I know not, lady, but that gentleman there, in the blue doublet, do you know who he might be?" The nurse, wise to the ways of young lovers despite her concern, answered for her charge. "His name is Romeo, and a Montague, the only son of your great enemy." The words hit Juliet like a physical blow. Montague, the name that had been spoken in her household only as a curse, only as the embodiment of everything her family stood against. The young man who had just kissed her with such tender reverence, who had spoken to her in poetry, who had awakened her heart to possibilities she had never imagined, was her family's sworn enemy. Yet even as the rational part of her mind reeled at the impossibility of it all, her heart remained stubbornly, irrevocably his. The name might be cursed, but the soul behind it was pure light. How could something so wrong feel so absolutely right? Romeo, meanwhile, had made his own desperate inquiry of a passing servant and learned a truth that should have sent him fleeing into the night. Juliet Capulet, the daughter of his father's greatest enemy, the jewel of the house that had sworn to see all Montagues buried. He should have felt horror, should have cursed the cruel fate that would show him perfect love only to make it impossible to claim. Instead, he felt only a deeper certainty that this was meant to be. If love could bloom in such hostile soil, if two hearts could recognize each other across the divide of ancient hatred, then perhaps love was indeed stronger than death, more powerful than the feuds of families who had forgotten why they fought. The nurse tugged at Juliet's sleeve with increasing urgency. Come away. Your mother waits, and Count Paris grows restless for your attention." Count Paris, in the space of a single conversation, a single kiss, Juliet had forgotten entirely about the man her parents intended her to marry. Now, the thought of him, of his practical suits and reasonable expectations, seemed like contemplating a life lived underwater, all sound muffled, all color drained away. "I must go," she whispered to Romeo, and in those 3 words lay a universe of regret. "And I must let you," he replied, "though it feels like letting my soul walk away from my body." They parted then, each pulled back into the separate worlds of their feuding families, but both carrying within them the knowledge that everything had changed. The careful plans of parents and the weight of family expectations seemed suddenly fragile things, no match for the force that had been unleashed in the space between a pilgrim's prayer and a saint's blessing. As Juliet rejoined her mother and Count Paris, she struggled to appear normal, to smile and nod and make appropriate responses to Paris's continued discourse on the management of estates. But inside, her mind was spinning like a prayer wheel, repeating a single name over and over. Romeo, Romeo, Romeo. Each repetition felt like both a blessing and a curse. Lady Capulet noticed her daughter's distraction, but attributed it to the overwhelming nature of meeting her potential husband for the first time. "My dear, you seem quite flushed. Are you feeling well? Perhaps you should retire early this evening to prepare for tomorrow's further acquaintance with Count Paris." "Yes, mother," Juliet agreed quickly, grateful for any excuse to escape to the privacy of her chambers, where she might begin to process the earthquake that had just reshaped her world. I find myself quite overcome by the evening's events. Romeo, meanwhile, had rejoined Benvolio and Mercutio near the great doors of the hall. His friends immediately noticed the change in him, the way he moved like a man walking in a dream, the expression on his face that spoke of profound transformation. "Romeo, you look as if you've seen a ghost," Mercutio observed with his characteristic wit. "Or perhaps a vision of divine beauty that has struck you temporarily dumb. Please tell me you haven't fallen in love again in the space of a single evening." "In love again?" Romeo repeated, his voice distant and wondering. "No, my friend. I have never been in love before tonight. What I felt for Rosalind was but a shadow, a pale imitation of love. This is the sun after a lifetime of candlelight." Benvolio felt a chill of foreboding at his cousin's words. The intensity in Romeo's voice spoke of something far more dangerous than his previous romantic fantasies. This was not the safe melancholy of unrequited love, but something that could consume everything in its path. "Cousin, we should leave," Benvolio urged. "We've tempted fate enough for one evening. The longer we remain, the greater the risk of discovery." But Romeo seemed barely to hear him. His eyes searched the crowd for another glimpse of silver silk, another moment of connection with the girl who had become his entire world in the space of a heartbeat. The thought of leaving without speaking to her again felt like tearing his heart from his chest. "Romeo," Mercutio said more sharply, recognizing the signs of his friend's complete departure from reason. "We came, we saw, we conquered. Now, we must make our strategic retreat before someone recognizes us and turns this pleasant evening into a bloodbath." The mention of violence finally penetrated Romeo's romantic haze. The last thing he wanted was for his presence to bring danger to Juliet or her family, despite their ancient enmity. With enormous effort, he allowed his friends to guide him toward the exit, though every step away from her felt like a small death. As they slipped back into the cool night air, Romeo cast one last look at the golden windows of the Capulet Palace. Somewhere behind those walls was the girl who had become his destiny, probably preparing for bed, possibly thinking of him as he was thinking of her. The thought that she might lie sleepless, as he surely would, gave him a strange comfort. The three friends walked through Verona's darkened streets in relative silence, each lost in his own thoughts. Mercutio wondered at the strange intensity of the evening, the way the very air had seemed charged with possibility and danger. Benvolio worried about the consequences of their unauthorized visit, and the wild look in his cousin's eyes that spoke of trouble brewing. But Romeo walked as if his feet barely touched the cobblestones, his mind already composing the poetry that might capture what had passed between him and Juliet, already planning how he might see her again. The rational part of his mind whispered warnings about the impossibility of loving a Capulet, about the danger such a love would bring to both their houses. His heart, however, had made its choice with the finality of fate itself. He was Romeo Montague, and he loved Juliet Capulet with a love that felt written in the stars, ordained by heaven, inevitable as sunrise. Whatever consequences might follow, whatever obstacles might arise, that truth would remain constant as the northern star. In her chamber, high above the city, Juliet stood at her window, looking out at the same stars that watched over Romeo's journey home. The nurse had helped her out of the silver gown and into her nightdress, chattering nervously about the evening's events and the obvious favor Count Paris had shown her. But Juliet heard none of it. Her mind was full of dark eyes, behind a mask, of poetry spoken like prayer, of the moment when their hands had touched, and she had felt her soul recognize its mate. She pressed her palm to her lips, still feeling the ghost of his kiss, still marveling at how completely her world had changed in the space of a single dance. Romeo Montague, the name should have filled her with revulsion, with the inherited hatred of generations. Instead, it felt like music, like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. How was it possible to love someone so completely, so instantly, whose very existence was forbidden to her? Yet, as she gazed out at the star-filled sky, Juliet felt not despair, but a growing certainty that love this powerful could not be denied by human conventions. If the universe had conspired to bring them together, despite every obstacle, perhaps it would also provide a way for them to be together. She whispered his name into the darkness, and the sound of it seemed to transform the very air around her, filling her small chamber with possibility and promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new attempts by her parents to bind her to Count Paris, new reminders of why she should forget the young Montague who had stolen her heart. But tonight, she would hold this perfect moment close to her chest, this memory of recognition and connection that had made her feel truly alive for the first time in her young life. Tonight, she would dream of dark eyes and gentle hands, of poetry and pilgrims, of a love that felt both impossible and inevitable. And across the city, Romeo lay sleepless in his own bed, staring at the same stars and making the same impossible promises to the darkness. Two young hearts beat in perfect synchronization, despite the walls and hatred that separated them, both knowing that their lives had been forever changed by a single evening, a single glance, a single kiss that had rewritten the very foundations of their existence. Sleep would not come easily to either young heart that night. Romeo found himself pacing his chamber like a caged wolf, his mind replaying every moment of their encounter until each word, each glance, each breath had been examined and treasured like precious stones. The moonlight streaming through his window seemed different now, touched with silver that reminded him of her gown, charged with a magic he had never noticed before. His faithful friend Benvolio had warned him of the danger, and his rational mind understood the wisdom of those warnings. To love a Capulet was to court disaster, to invite bloodshed into both their houses. Yet his heart laughed at such practical concerns. What was safety compared to the feeling of completeness he had experienced in her presence? What was prudence when measured against the certainty that he had found his other half? He moved to his writing desk and took up his quill, desperate to capture something of what had passed between them. But words, those faithful servants that had always come readily to his romantic nature, now seemed inadequate to the task. How could mere language contain the lightning that had struck when their eyes met? How could poetry express the reverence he had felt when their hands touched, as if he were being permitted to hold something sacred? Meanwhile, Juliet lay in her narrow bed, staring at the embroidered canopy above her head without seeing its intricate patterns. The nurse had finally ceased her nervous chatter and retired to her own small chamber, leaving Juliet alone with thoughts that spun like leaves in an autumn wind. Every rational consideration argued against what her heart had decided so completely and so quickly. She was 13, barely more than a child, with no experience of the world beyond her father's walls. What could she possibly know of love? Yet the feeling that had overwhelmed her in the great hall had possessed a certainty that seemed to transcend age and experience. It was as if her soul had been waiting her entire life for this moment of recognition. This completion of a pattern she hadn't known was incomplete. The memory of Count Paris hovered at the edges of her consciousness like an unwelcome specter. He represented everything her family valued, everything a dutiful daughter should desire in a husband: security, status, a life mapped out in comfortable predictability. Yet after touching Romeo's hand, after hearing poetry flow from his lips like water from a spring, the thought of binding herself to Paris felt like agreeing to live in black and white after glimpsing a world painted in brilliant color. As the night deepened, both Romeo and Juliet found themselves drawn to their windows, each gazing out at the sleeping city that lay between them like a vast ocean. Neither could have known that they were looking toward each other's dwelling, guided by an instinct deeper than conscious thought. The stars that had witnessed their meeting now watched over their separate longing, ancient lights that had seen countless love stories unfold beneath their distant glow. Romeo pressed his forehead against the cool glass of his window, his breath fogging the pane as he whispered her name into the darkness. Juliet. The sound of it seemed to contain all the music he had ever heard, all the poetry he had ever read, all the beauty he had ever imagined. 2 syllables that had become his entire vocabulary of hope. In her chamber, Juliet traced patterns on the stone sill of her window, her finger following invisible letters that spelled out the name she dared not speak aloud. Romeo. Even thinking it felt like rebellion, like stepping across a line that had been drawn in blood and sealed with generations of hatred. Yet her heart refused to recognize such boundaries. Love, she was discovering, acknowledged no law but its own. The hours crawled by with the peculiar slowness that only lovers know, each minute stretching like an hour, each hour like a day. Dawn seemed an impossible distance away, and yet both feared its arrival. Daylight would bring the return of duty, of family expectations, of the rigid structures that governed their separate worlds. In the darkness, they could exist in the magical space between possibility and reality, where love felt larger than the obstacles arrayed against it. Romeo abandoned his futile attempts at sleep and instead began composing verses in his mind, sonnets that tried to capture the miracle of their meeting. He thought of her eyes, dark and bright as stars reflected in deep water. He thought of her voice, musical even in ordinary speech, becoming pure song when she matched his poetic conceits. He thought of the way she had moved through the crowded hall, unconscious of her own grace, like a dancer who had never learned the steps, yet performed them perfectly. Juliet, for her part, found herself reliving every moment of their brief conversation, analyzing each word for hidden meanings, treasuring each inflection like a miser, counting gold, the way he had called her a saint, while making himself the humble pilgrim, spoke to something deep in her romantic soul. Here was a young man who understood that love could be both earthly and divine, who could speak of desire in language that elevated rather than degraded. She thought of his hands, gentle but sure, and the way his touch had sent lightning through her entire being. She thought of his lips, soft against hers, for that brief, perfect moment when the entire universe had held its breath. Most of all, she thought of his eyes, dark and intense, and full of a recognition that had mirrored her own instant certainty. As the night wore on, both began to understand that they stood at a crossroads that would determine the entire course of their lives. They could choose safety, could bow to the wisdom of families and the weight of tradition. Romeo could return to his melancholy pursuit of the untouchable Rosalind. Juliet could accept Count Paris and the comfortable life he offered. They could pretend that what had passed between them was merely the fancy of a moment, the kind of romantic nonsense that young people grow out of with time and experience. Or they could choose love, dangerous, impossible, transformative love that demanded everything and promised only itself in return. Love that would require them to defy not only their families, but the very foundations of the world they had been born into. Love that might destroy them, but would certainly change them beyond recognition. In the deepest hour of the night, when the city lay wrapped in silence, and even the guards on the walls dozed at their posts, both Romeo and Juliet made their choice. Not consciously, not with careful deliberation, but with the absolute certainty that comes from the heart rather than the mind. They would choose love. Whatever the cost, whatever the consequences, they would find a way to be together. Romeo rose from his restless bed and dressed quietly, his movements guided by a purpose he didn't fully understand, but trusted completely. The night air called to him, promising adventure and possibility. If he could not sleep for thinking of her, then perhaps the darkness would provide another path to her presence. Juliet, too, found herself unable to remain passive in the face of such overwhelming feeling. She moved to her window and unlatched it, letting the cool night breeze flow into her chamber like a breath of freedom. The stars seemed closer now, more personal, as if they were confidants rather than distant lights. Neither could have predicted what would happen next. Neither could have planned the miracle that was about to unfold. But love, as they were about to discover, has its own logic, its own magic, its own way of creating possibilities where none should exist. The night that had begun with a chance encounter at a masquerade ball was about to bless them with something even more impossible, even more beautiful. In the garden beneath Juliet's window, the roses her mother tended with such care released their perfume into the darkness, as if nature itself was preparing to witness something sacred. The ancient walls that divided the feuding houses of Montague and Capulet were about to prove powerless against the force that had been unleashed in a crowded ballroom, when two young hearts recognized each other across the divide of hatred and chose love instead of safety, hope instead of prudence, each other instead of the comfortable cages their families had prepared for them. The stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, the same stars that had watched over lovers since the beginning of time, and they seemed to lean closer to earth as if eager to witness the next chapter in this ancient story of passion that burns brighter than reason, love that proves stronger than death, and two souls who would rather face destruction together than live safely apart. Rather face destruction together than live safely apart. The ancient stones of Verona seemed to whisper secrets as Romeo made his way through the narrow streets, his footsteps echoing softly against walls that had witnessed centuries of love and loss. The city slept around him, but he moved with the restless energy of a man possessed, drawn by forces he could neither name nor resist. His destination was unclear even to himself, yet his feet carried him with unerring purpose toward the quarter where the Capulet Palace stood like a fortress against the night. He told himself he merely sought air, sought solitude to process the revolution that had occurred within his chest. But his heart knew better. His heart understood that proximity to her, even separated by walls and windows in the vast gulf of family hatred, was preferable to the torture of distance. If he could not hold her, perhaps he could at least breathe the same night air, stand beneath the same constellation of stars that watched over her sleep. The Capulet estate loomed before him, its high walls topped with iron spikes that spoke eloquently of the violence that simmered beneath Verona's civilized surface. Yet those barriers seemed almost quaint now, laughable obstacles compared to the force that had seized his soul. What were walls and gates and the threat of death to a heart that had found its other half? What was prudence to a man who had tasted paradise in a single kiss? Romeo found himself beneath an ancient olive tree that grew close to the garden wall, its gnarled branches reaching toward the palace like arthritic fingers seeking warmth. From here, he could see the upper windows of the great house, most dark now in the deep hours of night. Yet one window glowed softly with candlelight, a golden beacon that drew his gaze like a lodestone draws iron. Could it be her chamber? The thought sent electricity through his veins, the possibility that she might be as sleepless as he, as tormented by the memory of their meeting as he found himself to be. The rational part of his mind whispered warnings about the madness of lingering here, in the very heart of enemy territory, where discovery would mean not just embarrassment, but likely death. Yet reason seemed a distant, irrelevant voice compared to the symphony of hope that sang in his blood. He settled himself against the olive tree's ancient trunk, content for the moment simply to exist in her approximate presence, to watch that distant window and imagine the miracle of her waking thoughts. The night air carried the scent of roses from the garden beyond the wall, a perfume that seemed to speak of beauty cultivated in secret places, of treasures hidden behind forbidding barriers. Above him, unknown to Romeo's watchful vigil, Juliet moved through her chamber, like a spirit unable to find rest. The candle flame that had caught his attention flickered as she passed, casting dancing shadows on walls that had become the boundaries of her entire world. Yet tonight, those walls felt less like protection than like prison bars, keeping her from the destiny that called to her from beyond their stone embrace. She had dismissed the nurse hours ago, claiming fatigue, but knowing that sleep would be impossible. How could she rest when every fiber of her being hummed with new awareness, when the very air seemed charged with possibility? The memory of Romeo's touch lingered on her skin like a benediction, and his words echoed in her mind with the persistence of prayer. The formal introduction to Count Paris felt like something that had happened to another person, in another lifetime. How could her parents expect her to bind herself to a man who spoke only of practical matters when she had heard poetry flow from lips that understood the language of the soul? How could she accept the comfortable cage of conventional marriage when she had glimpsed the vast sky of true love? She found herself at the window again, drawn by restlessness and a longing she could not name. The cool night air caressed her face like a lover's touch, and she leaned against the stone sill, gazing out at the sleeping city that stretched below. Somewhere in those darkened streets was the young man who had awakened her heart, possibly lying sleepless in his own bed, possibly thinking of her as she thought of him. The stars seemed closer tonight, more intimate, as if they had become personal friends rather than distant lights. She remembered stories the nurse had told her of lovers who communicated through star positions, who found ways to send messages across impossible distances through the ancient language of celestial movements. The thought that Romeo might be looking at these same stars filled her with a strange comfort, a sense of connection that transcended the physical barriers between them. As she gazed downward, her attention was caught by a shadow beneath the olive tree that grew near the garden wall. At first, she thought it merely a trick of moonlight, the kind of phantom shapes that darkness creates for lonely eyes. But as she watched, the shadow shifted, resolved itself into something unmistakably human, unmistakably familiar despite the distance and darkness. Her heart stopped, then began beating with such violence she feared it might be heard throughout the sleeping palace. Could it truly be him? Had love driven him to the same madness that had brought her to this window? The possibility seemed too perfect, too much like something from the romantic tales she had devoured in secret, hidden away from her mother's practical disapproval. And so, as dawn approaches over fair Verona, we leave our star-crossed lovers suspended in that perfect moment of recognition, their hearts beating in rhythm despite the ancient hatred that divides their houses. Tonight, you've witnessed the birth of the greatest love story ever told, a passion so pure it transcended family feuds, social expectations, and even death itself. Let their courage to choose love over safety, hope over fear, inspire your own dreams as sleep finally claims you. May you rest peacefully, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, true love always finds a way.